I can feel that it's happening. I can feel it settling into my bones. It's coming back. I can feel it defrosting in my brain as we speak. My Hunger Games obsession. My TikTok For You page is just those stupid whistle song Josh Hutcherson memes. They're driving me insane. I saw the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes movie yesterday, and all I want to do is talk about it because I am, after all, just a 26-year-old teenager. So, I watched the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes movie. I have read the book. I recently rewatched all the old movies, and we are going to discuss it completely spoiler-free at first to just really get into the nitty-gritty of all of the little things that I thought. We're gonna be comparing the book to the movie. I want to compare the prequel to the original trilogy. We're gonna be asking the important questions like, is it okay to create sympathy for a fascist dictator character? And why is Snow so hot? Next week I will come out with a more in-depth spoiler-filled analysis of Snow's character arc, and I really want to go into what makes this such a fantastic villain origin story. But that's coming next week, so if you want to make sure you don't miss that, subscribe to my channel. Hello! Let me know what you thought of the movie and if you think you're gonna like it if you haven't watched it yet, and let's get started. Okay, before we can properly dive into the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, we have to kind of talk about the original trilogy, the Hunger Games trilogy, because I recently rewatched all of those movies because the theater near my house was just screening them all in the movie theater, so I got to see them on the big screen again. Oh, I felt like 6-year-old me again. It was amazing. And I had some like new insights on the series that I didn't have when I watched it as a teenager, so I want to go into that first a little bit. So much of the depth of this series went completely over my head when I first watched and read it as a 16-year-old, especially the horrors of the game. Of course I knew that it was bad, but as a teenager I really saw it as something like kind of cool, you know. It was just like a fun little action movie. One thing that comes to mind is in the Hunger Games, I am gonna talk spoilers about like the original trilogy, by the way. In the Hunger Games movie, when Katniss is first going into the arena and the counter starts and they all start running towards the cornucopia, there's a scene that's just a compilation of the slaughter that's happening around the cornucopia. And I remember when I first watched that movie, that was just like an action scene to me. But when I watched it again in the theaters as a 26-year-old, I realized like a scene with like no music in the background, it's there to show the horrors of these children slaughtering each other, and that kind of went over my head when I was younger. Same thing with like the anti-war message, this whole thing of like remember who the real enemy is. I kind of understood it, but I didn't fully understand it. And one of the main things that I remember never fully understanding was why Katniss killed President Coin at the end of Mockingjay when she has to execute President Snow, the villain of the story. Instead, she executes President Coin, who is the president of District 12. And I never fully understood it, but now it was like extremely clear to me that she was just going to take Snow's power vacuum and make herself like an authoritarian ruler and not constitute democracy. Like, to me, the signs now were so clear, but when I was younger, I didn't really see the red flags for that. Also, something I never expect to say this, but it was kind of a common sentiment among my friends that Haymitch kind of, he's kind of, this is the stuff that happens when you get older. Suddenly you start looking at like old men in movies and you're like, why are you now suddenly one of the attractive ones? So please tell me I'm not the only one, because I will feel crazy if I am the only one. I had suppressed the immense pain that Peeta and Katniss give me, like the pain of their romance and how it is just brutally destroyed by the Capitol when Peeta gets hijacked and his memories get jumbled up and he starts believing that Katniss is evil. I sobbed. I sobbed in the theater. I'm not saying like, oh, I cried, I left a few tears. No, I was like sobbing in the theater over their love and the fact that he doesn't remember her. I don't think any YA couple has ever made me feel the way they do, and I am reminded of the fact that out of all of like the YA love interests that I've ever read all throughout my teenage years, Peeta Mellark is just the best one. He's just the best one. Gale, on the other hand, is even more annoying. I already didn't like him, but now, my gosh, every single time this man comes on screen in Mockingjay, it's just so he can continue moaning about how Katniss isn't choosing him and she's not making a choice about who to love. And I'm like, this girl has PTSD. You're in a war zone. People are getting killed around you, Gale. Every time this man came on screen, the entire movie theater, collective sigh of disappointment of seeing this man's face. And rightfully so. And last but not least, President Snow, as always, is just such a fantastic, scary, and manipulative villain. And there are actually a lot of scenes and things that Snow says in the original trilogy that allude to things that happen in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, even though the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes hadn't even been written by that point, which is very interesting, but those are spoilers, so I'll go into that in like my more in-depth video essay next week. But hey, speaking of Snow, let's talk about the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. It is getting really dark. This is my fault for wanting to immediately talk about this book. I'll probably talk until it gets dark and then continue talking tomorrow. So The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is the prequel to the original Hunger Games trilogy, and we mostly follow President Snow, who is the villain in the original trilogy, but in this book we follow his perspective, kind of showing how he became the fascist authoritarian dictator that he is in the Hunger Games. We follow the 10th annual Hunger Games during a time where the Hunger Games was definitely not as much of a spectacle as it is in the original trilogy. And our main character, President Snow, he is tasked with mentoring the tributes from District 12, and his task is to make sure that she survives and wins the games. And yes, a romance story develops between President Snow and this girl from District 12, Lucy Gray Baird. But I would say the main point of the story is watching Snow develop his worldviews that later leads to his style of ruling Panem as a president. And throughout the story you can get to see him being pulled back and forth by different forces, different people who all have different worldviews, and they all influence his worldviews in different ways. He really starts out as kind of an underdog. He is studying really hard at the academy. He has big plans for the future, becoming president, and you would almost start to root for him as the main character, but not entirely. They do a great job at instantly showing you that he is self-centered at heart and don't completely sympathize him. And the story just beautifully shows how in the end President Snow becomes the fascist authoritarian dictator that he is in the Hunger Games as president. And you see how the Hunger Games kind of started off as not as much of a spectacle, but how it kind of slowly became the spectacle that it is later in the Hunger Games. I thought the acting was very, very well done. Rachel Ziegler does a fantastic job at showing Lucy Gray's erratic defiance. And apparently she sings all of the songs live while filming. Amazing. I think Tom Blythe as President Snow also does a fantastic job at showing Snow's charm like manipulative charm as a young man, and Viola Davis as the evil Dr. Goal. Well, she's not evil. Well, is she? Yeah, she's kind of evil. The doctor that is kind of taking President Snow on as like a mentor figure. Viola Davis does a fantastic job, and I love her costuming. The costuming is great in general. I especially love the Academy outfits with their little skirts, and then Dr. Goal's outfits. Wow. With the two different eye colors. This is a detail that's not in a book, but it really gives her that mad scientist vibe. Her lab coat that is colored in such a way that it makes it look like she is drenched in blood. Her red gloves that very clearly shows that she has blood on her hands. And then of course there is Lucky Flickerman, who is like the great granddad, I don't know, of Flicker. What is his name? Did I forget his name? Caesar Flickerman, of course, the amazing Caesar Flickerman who presents the games in the original trilogy. And Lucky Flickerman in the prequel was just a fantastic source of comic relief. So those are kind of my general thoughts. Let's get into the nitty-gritty and talk about the prequel versus the original trilogy. But I will talk about that tomorrow because it's dark now. And I stupidly just decided to film right now because I can't shut up about the Hunger Games. Hello, it is the next day. I'm back. It is raining, which you can probably hear in the background. Very cozy. Let's talk about the prequel versus the original trilogy. Aside from the fact that we of course have a completely different main character, there are a lot of other differences in the story as well. First of all, it takes place 65 years in the past, the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, during the 10th Hunger Games. This means there's a lot less technology, and the entire movie and story has a kind of old-timey retro futuristic vibe. They were very inspired by, I think, post-Reconstruction Berlin, and everything has that 40s 50s retro vibe. You don't really get to see this in the book, but it was something that they could really play with a visual format like a movie. And because this is only the 10th Hunger Games, the spectacle of the Hunger Games isn't really there yet the way that it is in the original trilogy. And because of that, there's a lot more focus on how horrific the Hunger Games actually is, because there's just less decor and frills to patch it up, which was the entire point. You can really see during this movie how these game makers and President Snow are slowly coming up with ideas to make the Hunger Games the spectacle, the reality TV show that it is in the original trilogy. But because in the sequel it is still so very stripped down in this very small arena, the horrors are not palliated. The themes of the stories are also very different. The original trilogy was very anti-war first and foremost, and then also focused a lot on like reality TV and the problems with that. The prequel also anti-war, but there's a lot less focus on the reality TV of it all, although there is focus on like the creation of the spectacle. But mainly the themes the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes tackles is the state of nature, the natural state of humanity. Is humanity at its core good and cooperative, or is humanity at its core selfish and at war with each other? What does it mean to trust each other, and how important is trust in our civilization? So it's a little bit more philosophical than the original trilogy, which I really liked. And if you experience both the prequel and the original trilogy, you're definitely going to see a lot of parallels. I think the most obvious ones is that Katniss and Peeta are such a clear parallel to President Snow and Lucy Gray. Not only is President Snow a literal thematic counterpart to the girl on fire, But also the love stories are kind of a counterpart. You know, you have this like blonde boy, and then you have the brunette, the kind of defined brunette from District 12. And after you see the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, suddenly it's gonna make so much sense to you why President Snow was so mistrustful of Katniss's and Peeta's on-screen love, and why he was so quick to be like, that's fake. To me, nothing goes above the original trilogy. I keep calling it a trilogy, but the movies were of course a quartet. I think the originals are still my favorite, but maybe that's just nostalgia, and I think the prequel is incredibly strong in its own right. Now let's talk about the book, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, versus the movie. Because this is such a faithful adaptation, we're not gonna discuss any like big spoiler points. I'm just gonna be talking about some general things and some minor details so you can decide for yourself whether you want to watch this or not if you haven't seen the movie yet. But first I want to give my general quick review of the book. This one came out in 2020, 3 years ago, and I read it immediately when it came out. And I remember really enjoying the political themes that are woven throughout this book. Like I already mentioned, the political philosophy of the state of nature of humanity. I loved seeing how Susan Collins addressed that theme. But the reason I still gave this book like a lukewarm 3 stars is because I mainly thought it was kind of boring. This book is over 500 pages and I never felt truly sucked into the plot or attached to any of these characters. And I think that's because in the original trilogy, you know, you're in Katniss's head, first person perspective, as she is being hunted down, constantly at risk of losing her life. But in this book, it's third person perspective of Coriolanus Snow. You're a little bit more detached, and he's rarely ever like super in danger, so there's a lot of lack of that sense of urgency that made the first trilogy so amazing. So what are the differences in the movie compared to the book? They are very minimal. It's an incredibly faithful adaptation based on like the main plot points, and they mostly just kind of changed small little things like how certain people die is slightly different. The order in which the tributes die during the Hunger Games is slightly different. Sometimes certain pieces of dialogue are given to a different character. It's really nothing big. I think the main thing that stood out to me is that the first acts of the book go incredibly fast in the movies. But I actually didn't mind that, because if I want to answer the question what things were better in the movie, I would say that this faster pacing was really nice because they only focused on like the main most important plot points of the book. I found it a lot less boring, and because it's movie format, so you're following all these different characters, I felt so much more sense of urgency. Like I was genuinely on the edge of my seat, you know, like I was in the movie theater and I could see everywhere, you know, girls crawling up into their boyfriend's chest because everything was so tense, and I was really into it in a way that didn't happen to me when I was reading the book. And I think it's because they condensed the storyline and you're not just in Coriolanus's head, you actually get to follow Lucy Gray as she is in the Hunger Games being hunted down by these other tributes, whereas in the book a lot of the time Snow doesn't really know what's happening in the arena because he's not there. Also, Lucy Gray is a singer, so in the book there's a lot of just random song lyrics, which I personally always find a little bit boring in book format, but because in the movie these songs are actually performed by Rachel Zegler, it works a lot better. I think I might even go as far as saying that just enjoyment-wise, I enjoyed the movie a lot more, as in I already want to see it again, whereas I've never felt the need to reread this book. But there are of course also some things that I thought were better in the book than in the movie. 3 things that were definitely better in the book. I think the main thing that's missing from the movie, and they can't really help it because that's just the nature of a movie is that you don't get to see Snow's internal dialogue. In the book, you actually get to see Snow's thoughts, and they are absolutely deranged. These are the thoughts of a narcissistic man, and you just don't get that in the movies because that's not possible. And reading from his viewpoint is a constant reminder to you, the reader, that he is a very self-centered man. Let me just give some examples. For example, when Lucy Gray is singing about Snow as like a love song, he's all like, oh my god, that's me, I'm her true love, I saved her life. But then when she's singing about herself and her past, his inner monologue is, oh, a ghost story, boo, so ridiculous. Well, he tried hard to love it when he saw them tomorrow. At some point, he has to dig around for worms in the dirt, and his entire monologue is just a full paragraph of him going like, I shouldn't be doing this, I'm some of the best that humanity has to offer, I can't believe I'm supposed to be doing this and stooping so low. Oh, I'm better than everyone. And you really don't get to see this in the movie because you're not in his head. And you can tell in the movie that the directors and the actors are doing everything they can to still kind of get this across to the reader, the self-centeredness, by showing Snow saying different things to different people to appease them. But still, Snow seems a lot more sympathetic in the movies than in the book. Another thing I found sad is that they left out the Meadow song, which is the song that Katniss sings for Rue when she has died and she is kind of paying tribute to her. I'm just sad that they left this out of the movie because knowing that Lucy at one point sings this and President Snow knows this song because of Lucy, it just adds another layer to when you're rewatching The Hunger Games. Now you realize that when Katniss is singing that song, Snow is probably very much reminded of his ex-lover at that moment. And then my one, I think, biggest gripe about the movie, and this is definitely a spoiler for the ending, is that they end the movie with the quote that Snow says in Mockingjay, and that is, "It's the things we love most that destroy us." Please let me guys know what you think about this. If I'm correct, this is not really in the book, but I personally feel like putting so much focus on that quote, it's also in the trailer, really makes it seem like Lucy Gray betraying Snow at the end is like the reason that he went evil. You know, it's the things that we love most that destroy us. It's because Lucy deserted him or betrayed him, dubious by the way, that he went evil. Whereas I feel like that's not the point of the movie at all. The point is that there were so many different instances that influences President Snow's view of humanity that in the end he's become so mistrusting of others that he ends up killing Lucy even. But it's not that he went evil because she betrayed him. Not a fan of that. I'll probably go into more detail about that in like my actual spoilery video essay next week. Next thing that I wanted to discuss is the question of whether this book, the prequel, and the movie, the prequel, are just kind of a cash grab, the way authors sometimes just randomly come out with sequels or prequels to just, you know, continue to profit from their very popular franchise. I disagree. If Susan Collins wanted a cash grab, there would already be a Haymitch spin-off. There would already be a Joanna spin-off. And this book would have just been another full trilogy instead of just one book. No, Susan Collins writes with intention. She writes when she has something to say. And I know that that was also her reason for writing The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. In an interview with Scholastic, she's being asked this question: did you always plan to return to Panem after the trilogy? And if not, what made you return to the story? To which she answers, here's how it works. I have two worlds, the Underland from the Underland Chronicle series and Panem, the world of the Hunger Games. I use both of them to explore elements of war theory. When I find a related topic that I want to examine, then I look for the place it fits best. The state of nature debate of the Enlightenment period naturally lent itself to a story centered on Coriolanus Snow, which also again shows that her whole point with this book was to explore the state of nature debate. So no, not a cash grab. This woman has something to say, okay? So when this book first came out, there was kind of a bit of controversy around it because a lot of people were like, why do we need a villain origin story for this fascist villain? You know, does he really need a redemption arc? Do we really need to create sympathy for him? So I kind of want to discuss, is this movie creating sympathy for President Snow? So right off the bat, I want to say that yes, this is a villain origin story, but that doesn't mean that it's in any way redeeming him or that it's like a sad backstory. A villain origin story shows why a villain chose evil. It doesn't mean that it excuses it. Just because you understand why a person or character became the way that they are doesn't mean that it immediately justifies their actions. I don't really like it when people conflate like understanding and explanation of someone's behavior with condoning that behavior. You can understand a character's motivations and uncover all the layers of their character and still conclude that they're evil. And that's definitely what's happening in this book. And I think the reason we have this idea that a villain origin story is just gonna make people sympathize with the villain is because a lot of writers, when they make a villain origin story, choose to go the route of the sad backstory. Oh, his girlfriend broke up with him and that's why he committed genocide. That is one of the most common types of villain origin stories. Oh, something really sad happened in his past. He has trauma and that's why he's now bad. But that's not what every villain origin story has to be, and neither is this one. And that's why I really like The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes as a villain origin story, because it shows that you can do villain origin stories without having to do the standard, oh, he had trauma and now he kills people. I mean, yes, sad things happen in Snow's past, as you will see if you go see the movie or read the book, but that is not at all the focal point of this story. The point of Snow's villain origin story is to show all the little different beats in his life that together form him as a person and form his view on humanity. There's all these people in his life and also events that happen in his life that influence how he sees the world around him. And this book very much goes into how what you think of humanity, whether humanity is good or evil, influences how later in life you decide to rule a country like Panem. If you believe humanity is selfish and chaotic, you are more likely to try to keep them in check by ruling with an iron fist, the way Snow does. This villain origin story also very clearly shows that the villain in question, President Snow, has a choice in the matter, and he chooses evil in many instances. Again, I'm gonna go more in-depth and spoilery about this in my deep dive analysis video of President Snow, so if you don't want to miss that, subscribe and let me know what you would like me to talk about. And then the last thing, more funny thing that I wanted to focus on, and that is the extremely important question of, is President Snow too hot in this movie? I've seen some discussion about it. Apparently not everyone agrees. Some people think he's not attractive at all, but I don't know. I've seen a lot of people on my For You page being like, why is he so attractive? What's going on? He's the villain. And he does look good. I mean, Tom Blythe, beautiful human being. And I'm convinced that it was intentional. And I guess this is a spoiler for the first scene of the movie, but the first scene of the movie, we just get to see President Snow looking shirtless and gorgeous the entire scene long, as he's being very charming and nice with his family. And I'm convinced that they just did this on purpose to make us sympathize with him before flipping the switch on him. I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's creating too much sympathy for President Snow as a character. I feel like it's kind of the point that at first glance you're charmed by President Snow, because that's his whole thing. He is charming, he is manipulative. So it makes sense that at first he may seem kind of sympathetic. That's kind of the point. I don't think that authors have any responsibility to make their villains like unlikable in every aspect so that anyone who watches the movie or reads the book will undoubtedly hate them. It's more interesting to show that these villainous characters are really good at making people like them and charming the people around them. Those were all of my thoughts about the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes just dumped out into this video. I'm very excited to make more content. Please do let me know if there's like more things you would like me to make a video about, if there's anything you would like me to talk about. I'm happy to provide all of the Hunger Games and Ballad of Songbird adjacent content for you guys. I want to give a special thanks to all of my patrons who support the channel, with a special shout out to all the elite patrons that you can see over here. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you soon with another video, probably about the Hunger Games or the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes next week. Okay, bye!